The transformation of the world in the face of terror attacks, especially after 9/11, has been total and complete. After 9/11, there's been a change in the perception, and the world has realized that terrorism is an activity which is not permissible today, which is activity which impinges on civilization and impinges on activities which are very vital now to the progress of humankind, especially economic activities. So there's been a sea change during the last 10 years. Politically, I think the incoherence persists, and the perception in the minds of the people is determined by the propaganda they are exposed to. Well, I must say that the pro-terrorist groups have been very effective in launching their propaganda war. The theory of the root causes of terror, which has been announced by some of the leaders in the world, is a direct result of this sort of propaganda and the repetitive propaganda on these lines. So now everyone accepts that, although that is not a correct perception. So as far as the political response to terror is concerned, that still has to crystallize internationally, and it still has to crystallize within the countries itself. So there's been no coherent response to terror. President Bush talked about a war on terror, and he inducted the army to fight terror, to drain the swamps, as he said. But the recent raid on Osama bin Laden, in which he was killed, shows that what is required is motivated, well-trained groups to go for terrorist leadership and thereby make a change, not by launching infantry attacks and military attacks on so-called terror hideouts. We have also to talk about the impact of terror on Islamic populations as such. And one can see that there has been a gradual distancing of large sections of the population from Islamic terror groups. The enthusiasm and the ease with which recruits were available a few years back is not evident today. For instance, there was a news item saying that the Taliban had abducted a number of youngsters to convert them to their way of thinking. Well, they didn't have to abduct. They used to get volunteers easily. But what has happened is that within the Muslim countries, there has been a lot of turmoil, political turmoil, which has impacted large sections of the population. And that turmoil is not of anyone's making, but it is an internal dynamic of the country is concerned. What is happening in quite a large number of Muslim countries is that people are probably disenchanted with this technique and want to move on and want to better their livelihood, better their conditions. And that is what is keeping people away from terror. So this shows the large disenchantment of large sections of Muslim populations, and especially Muslim women, with terror. They are getting away from it. They want to go to schools, to colleges, and the evidence of that is the difficulty with which women are pursuing their studies in Afghanistan in spite of tremendous opposition, in spite of fear of death and disfigurement and torture, ostracization. In spite of all that, they are trying to go out of the narrow confines of the type of education they were being imparted and join the mainstream, the world's mainstream of education, which is a sort of a universal education. So this is, but the impact of this is not visible as dramatically as it should be, because I think the impact will take time, maybe another 10 years, maybe another 15 years, but then the impact will certainly be there, and it will certainly lead to a lessening of terror activities. It may not lead to a total stoppage, but it lead to a reduction in terrorist activity. Different countries have had their, shall we say, what they call the Arab Spring. But like all mass movements, after toppling the regimes concerned, it appears they do not know what to do. And this happens, I think it happens whenever the changes are done without a clear political orientation among those people who are trying to change society. And this is, of course, a larger issue which comes up. The larger issue being that the new technologies which are developing require a new politics, which has not happened. The political idiom is still the 20th century idiom or the 18th century idiom or the 19th century idiom. But what should be the politics for the 21st century, which will be conducive to mankind's progress? That still has not emerged, and I don't think much thinking is going on about that. So in the Arab world, you've had these regime changes and a movement towards democracies. But how these democracies will function is very difficult to say. And the confusion within the Muslim world, I think, is to a very large extent reflected in what is happening in Turkey, or has been happening for the last 10, 15 years, where there's a constant struggle going on between the fundamentalists and the liberals within the Muslim mindset. So this particular struggle is still, I should say, based on the old ideologies. So how do you, the question remains that how do you get these things together and work out a relationship between the scriptures of any religion and the new thought which is emerging out of the new technologies. There is a conflict there, and that is a conflict which has not been resolved. So that conflict brings about various, shall we say, various different types of strands into communities. You just had the shootout in Norway the other day, which was based on that gentleman's reading of various histories of various religions, including the impact of Islam on those religions. So how the mindset of the people belonging to various religious groups will respond to the new technology is difficult to say. But in new technology are also the weapons of mass destruction. They are the products of technologies, maybe a little older, but they are the products of such technologies. How would, if it comes into the hands of terrorist groups or Islamic terrorists, how would they use these technologies is very difficult to predict, because you could not predict what Osama bin Laden would do till he did it. And no one could predict that people can use an aeroplane full of people as a missile and self-destruct and destroy property and kill such a large number of people. Similarly, then such weapons, both biological and nuclear, fall into the hands of terrorist groups. It is very difficult to predict as to how they will use it. Of course, the obvious conclusion would be that they would use it to destroy cultures which they feel are opposed to their own culture, and in that they have already, shall we say, highlighted the cultures of the Christian West, the Hindu India, and the Israelis as the three main enemies of Islam. So these countries, these cultures will have to be careful about what may become a grave threat to them when such weapons fall into the hands of the Islamist extremists, who not only see enemies, but they also have a agenda of world domination. What happens, say, starting from today, in the next 10 years? Does the world continue to live under fear of terror? And that fear is there because incidents keep on happening, which keep on reminding people of what terrorists can achieve or do. So is the world fated to live with this sort of a fear for the remaining 10, 20, 30 years, for the coming 10, 20, 30 years? As the spread of education takes place, as a mindset change is brought about, not through a conscious effort of anyone, but through the automatic spread of technology and greater interaction between people in different parts of the world. The number of people espousing the terrorist mindset will reduce, but when will it reduce to a proportion of the population that it becomes negligible or it becomes totally marginalized is difficult to say. But ultimately, the world is tending towards that. It is tending towards the ultimate marginalization of terror, and whatever action is being taken by various governments in the world, that is contributing to it, but not to such a large extent as the automatic spread of technology without any effort, through opening up of trade, through opening up of commerce, through interaction between nations, through easier travel, and probably this process itself within the next 10 to 15 years should lead to a situation where people would not be talking about terror as one of the central issues on our civilizational horizon,